Good morning. I'm happy to welcome you to yet another session of the NPTEL course Postmodernism in Literature. In today's lecture, we shall be talking about one of the foremost postmodern fiction, Slaughterhouse-Five, the novel authored by Kurt Vonnegut. If you recall one of the earliest discussions that we had in the foremost weeks, we did talk about a particular novel titled Slaughterhouse-Five, where the author tells us that there are almost no characters in this story and almost no dramatic confrontations, because most of the people in it are so sick and so much the listless playthings of enormous forces. One of the main effects of war, after all, is that people are discouraged from being characters. So we did talk about this author Kurt Vonnegut, who has also been considered as a poster child of postmodernist literature. And in today's session, we have two of our students, Akshan and Suparna, introducing the text to us. I hope this will be a joyful ride to you and also encourage you to take a look at this novel Slaughterhouse-Five, written by Kurt Vonnegut.
Slaughterhouse-Five, or The Children's Crusade, A Duty Dance to Death. The author is Kurt Vonnegut, and it will be presented by me, Akshan, and Suparna. Basic outline: first we'll be talking about the author, then the book, the plot summary, major characters, themes, motifs, postmodern narrative, aspects of science fiction, and then references. Kurt Vonnegut. He lived from 1922 to 2007. So he was a novelist, short story writer, playwright, and has written several non-fiction, mostly towards the end of his career. His works are known for their satire, their black comedy, their irony-laden fiction, and of course science fiction. And he's one of the major forefront writers of postmodernism. He's a well-known social critic and has been dubbed the counterculture's novelist, one of many. His most famous works include Slaughterhouse-Five, Breakfast of Champions, Cat's Cradle. So the book is basically an anti-war novel. It also has aspects of historical fiction, science fiction, and it is semi-autobiographical fiction. It was written around 1945 to 1968 in USA. The publication was during 1969, during the Vietnam War. So as an anti-war novel, it gained a lot of popularity because at that time the Vietnam War was also losing support in the US. Now the author himself was part of World War II during the historical bombings of Dresden by the Allied forces on the Nazi town of Dresden. So the first person sections are mainly in the first and last chapters. They mostly talk about how the novel was written, but the author inserts himself several times during the course of the book. And it has been banned or challenged on at least 18 occasions by different agencies. The plot. The plot is basically about this man called Billy Pilgrim, who is unstuck in time. This is how chapter 2 begins. Chapter 1, as I said, was how the narrator, that is Kurt Vonnegut, narrates about how he wrote the book, basic outline of his own experiences writing the book. So Billy Pilgrim is unstuck in time. He travels between different periods of his life, unable to control which period he lands in. As a result, the narrative is non-linear. And basically, he lives between scenes as a prisoner of war in Nazi Germany and scenes from his boring life in New York as an optometrist, and his travels to the planet Tralfamadore. The book's central topic is the horror of the war and the PTSD that Billy Pilgrim had to go through, because of which it is very heavily implied that he invents this life as a time traveler and as a traveler to the planet Tralfamadore. Well, I say traveler, I mean he was abducted. So this way he reconciles this trauma with science fiction and the Tralfamadorian doctrine, that is, there's no such thing as free will. Billy cannot change the past, the present, or the future, but he can accept them all.
Okay, I'm Suparna, and I'll be continuing with major characters in this text. So let's move on and see. The first of all is the protagonist, Billy Pilgrim. So he was a prisoner of war, and he was one of the survivors of the firebombing of Dresden. And then it's the author, Kurt Vonnegut, who comes in this novel, and his appearance recurs quite a bit. And then Bernhard O'Hare, he is also a wartime pal of Vonnegut, and there are many others who accompany Billy Pilgrim along his way during the wartime. Next, let's move on to Roland Urey, Edgar Derby and Wild Bob. These are people who he meets during the wartime and as he was a prisoner of war. Then Montana Wildhack was the young actress who was also kidnapped by aliens. So Kilgore Trout, he was one of the science fiction writers who comes in the story. He's a fictional character, of course, who inspires Billy Pilgrim a lot. And then we go to Howard W. Campbell, Werner Gluck, Paul Lazaro. Mary O'Hare happens to be the wife of Bernard O'Hare, and Valencia Murby, Billy's wife, Tralfamadorians, who are the aliens, Robert Pilgrim, Billy's son, Barbara Pilgrim, Billy's daughter. So let's move on to the themes. The first of all is the destructiveness of war. So this novel shows the reality of war without actually showing any glamour or exaggerating anything. Here is an excerpt which says, "Sam, here's the book. It's so short and jumbled and jangled, Sam, because there's nothing intelligent to say about a massacre. Everybody is supposed to be dead, to never say anything or want anything ever again. Everything is supposed to be very quiet after a massacre, and it always is, except for the birds. And what do the birds say? All there is to say about a massacre is things like potty wheat." So he shows the obviousness of what can somebody say about a war, what can be done about a war. There is quite a bit of irony that is there in the novel. So one of them is dramatic irony, where the reader understands the future, knows about something in the future, but the characters don't. So the characters are misled by one of the Englishmen who says, "You needn't worry about the bombs, by the way. Dresden is an open city, it is undefended and contains no war industries or troop concentrations of any importance." But it happens that Dresden is bombed right after they are moved to the slaughterhouse. And next is situational irony. Here the irony involving a situation where actions have an effect opposite to what was intended. So we see this when actually Hobo and Derby situations, where Hobo is actually in, both of these are in this cabinet which is actually moved from one place to another, and ultimately, though one of them says that they have seen much worse situations in life, happens to die right while they were travelling. The next theme which we get to see here is the illusion of free will. This comes mainly from the part of the novel about the aliens, where free will is said to be something that is inexistent, but people are bound to be the way they are going to be in future. So here is an excerpt which highlights this more. "I'm a Tralfamadorian, seeing all time as you might see a stretch of rocky mountains. All time is all time. It does not change, it does not lend itself to warnings or explanations." And later Billy Pilgrim goes on and asks if they believe in free will, for which they say, "If I hadn't spent so much time studying earthlings, I wouldn't have any idea what was meant by free will. I visited 31 inhabited planets in the universe and I have studied reports on 100 more. Only on Earth is there any talk of free will." Since these aliens are able to see time in the past, future and in the present, like the stretch of space, like we see Rocky Mountains, they are able to see everything and know that everything happens simultaneously at all times. So since this concept is inbuilt in the aliens, they don't quite believe in the fact that we can change the future, which has already happened or is happening and will happen to them. And next we will move on to motifs. So these are recurring structures or literary devices that highlight something very important in the text. "So it goes." This is a phrase that keeps coming in the text, and it has an equalizing fact. It actually shows the natural, accidental and all types of deaths and keeps an account of all these deaths. So this comes from the Tralfamadorian idea too, that whatever it might be, it is bound to happen and we have no control over it, so we as well may go with it. Next is potty wheat. This is a rhetorical question which says, what can be done about a war? Nothing can be changed about it. The author also highlights this, and we can see it from this excerpt. So this is author asking Harrison Starr about what he thinks about writing about an anti-war. "Why don't you write an anti-glacier book instead?" What he meant, of course, was that there would always be wars, that they were as easy to stop glaciers as it would be easy to stop wars. So basically he's saying that glaciers are inevitable. Natural catastrophes are inevitable, and they are bound to happen, and similarly wars are bound to happen too. There is a recurring presence of author in the narrator in the novel. So this is because he has an intimate connection with the bombing of Dresden, and he keeps coming in the novel quite a bit and positions himself in various situations, and though he doesn't actively participate and affect the novel, he is seen quite a bit in the novel.
So now we'll be talking about the postmodern narrative. John Francis Lyotard, the philosopher, he said about the postmodern condition as an incredulity towards meta-narratives. It's basically a fragmentization of all modernist disciplines, and it includes endless interpretations of all truths and blurring of the lines of reality. It looks at all perspectives that are involved so as to give the complete picture. Unlike modernism, it demonstrates that chaos cannot be defeated, and it accepts this chaos. The first postmodern aspect that we'll be talking about is historiographic metafiction. This is basically an intentional representation of a real historic event, which in this case was the bombing of Dresden, and the narrators, that is Vonnegut's presence during that, in a fictional form. It's problematized by non-linearity, the science fiction, the aliens, and the author himself being there. So it creates a sort of diverging narrative. For example, this text, this is the very beginning of the book. All this happened more or less. The war parts anyways are pretty much true. One guy I know really was shot in Dresden for taking a teapot that wasn't his. Another guy I know and I knew really did threaten to have his personal enemies killed by hired gunmen after the war. And so on. I've changed all the names. It breaks down the grand narrative, that is the meta-narrative, by using Brechtian's estrangement effect. This was introduced by Bertolt Brecht, the famous playwright of Baal and many other plays. Basically, this defamiliarizes the reader with the grand narrative and forces them into a crucial reinterpretation of the self. It's a critical study of the self, the history and the world, so that we are separated from the text. We can examine things without getting too personally involved. As P. Brooker in 1994 in their journal said, this breaking down the estrangement effect or isolating effect of Bertolt Brecht strips the event of its self-evident, familiar, obvious quality and creates a sense of astonishment and curiosity about it. This text says there isn't any particular relationship between the messages, except that the author has chosen them carefully, so that when seen all at once, they produce an image of life that is beautiful and surprising and deep. There's no beginning, no middle, no end, no suspense, no moral, no causes, no effects. What we love in our books are the depths of many marvelous moments seen all at one time. This is basically what the Chalfamodorians tell Billy Pilgrim about their novels, which is basically the model on what Kurt Vonnegut tried to write his novel about. Another very crucial text which which emphasizes the estrangement effect is there are almost no characters in this story and almost no dramatic confrontations, because most of the people in it are so sick and so much the listless playthings of enormous forces. One of the main effects of war, after all, is that people are discouraged from being characters. The novel does not try to read like a thriller or even a war novel. It basically shows us the horror, and it asks the reader to study it, to look at it, and to understand ourselves and the world. Another postmodern aspect is the temporal distortion of time and such. It's non-linear, and the reality and fiction, the lines between them are very skewed. It's fragmented. The reader must discern, must exercise along with the writer to discern what really happened and what is a product of Billy Pilgrim's mental state. As the chapter 2 begins, Billy Pilgrim has come unstuck in time. The absence of textual autonomy. A postmodern text reflects upon itself, and it's a process of production. It's when the author places himself in the narrative, his textual autonomy, his textual authority is lost. However, unlike the usual death of the author that is emphasized by Lyotard and such in postmodernism. By inserting himself as a character, and it being a real experience of his, it heightens the horrors and the dangers of the war even more. And the reader, by getting some authority, some shared authority over the text himself, is given space to analyze and dissect the text critically in order to recreate it. The text is: an American near Billy wailed that he had excreted everything but his brains. Moments later, he said, "There they go, there they go." He meant his brains. That was I. That was me. That was the author of the book. This way, Kurt Vonnegut is talking about himself in chapter 5, near Billy, who is the protagonist. The next point is poiomena, which is the ancient Greek for product. It's in this book a subpart of the previous point. It specifically talks about the process of creation of text, which is basically the entire chapter 1. A very crucial text which emphasizes this is: "So I held up my right hand and I made her a promise. 'Mary,' I said, 'I don't think this book of mine is ever going to be finished. I must have written 5,000 pages by now and thrown them all away. If I ever do finish it though, I give you my word of honor, there won't be a part for Frank Sinatra or John Wayne. I tell you what,' I said, 'I'll call it the Children's Crusade.'" A very crucial part of postmodern narrative is death of the modern hero. Modernism especially emphasizes on Odysseus, or a Greek sort of hero who knows all things right and wrong. So as per Foucault, the postmodern man is no longer the transcendental subject that can induce a change depending on the power of the intellect, but rather a powerless self that is constantly open to transformation by other forces. As this text says, he is in a constant state of stage fright, talking about Billy. He says, because he never knows what part of life he is going to have to act in next. Chapter 2. This is as same as, since the hero of the postmodern text is basically controlled by forces beyond his control, there is no notion of free will. The Chalfamerdorians' concept of the absence of free will comes into play here again. Postmodern narrative, one of its most highlighted and most famous part is the black humor, irony, playfulness, which is also there in Joseph Heller's Catch-22 and Thomas Pynchon's The Crying of Lot 49. It's basically, black humor is basically a literary technique to mask the severity of events. It's the humor that is discovered in agony, despair, or horror, and the playfulness that everything is not, that a playfulness to accept the chaos of the world and the characters in the world. For example, the British prisoners of war officers who were trapped along with the American ones, they had incredible morale and elevated spirit. They even did a musical version of Cinderella and gave the American POWs candles and soaps. However, these candles and soaps, so generously given, were made from human fat rendered from the Nazi war victims. It's ironical. Another text which portrays this quite well is, I think the climax of the book will be the execution of poor old Edward Derby. I said, the irony is so great. A whole city gets burned down and thousands of people are killed. And then this one American foot soldier is arrested in the ruins for taking a teapot. And he's given a regular trial and then he's shot by a firing squad.
Okay, let's move on to the aspects of science fiction which can be seen in the novel. So first of all that we see is time travel, which is also imbibed in the fact that it's a postmodern novel where we have fragmentation, and here we see non-linear timeline where the narrator jumps back and forth in time to give the sense of Billy Pilgrim not having any free will about where he is going to be in the next moment. So this is a very important aspect. Then we have creatures navigating through space and time. So this is also as a part of the time travel. The Chalfamerdorians abduct both Billy Pilgrim and Montana Wildhack, and it's this that shows that they are able to move and exercise being anywhere in space and time as they wish, but Billy Pilgrim is not able to do that. Fourth dimension is time. Again, this brings the idea from special relativity, where we actually see that the fourth dimension which is being controlled by these Tralfamadorians. The creatures can see where each star has been and where it is going, so that the heavens are filled with rarefied. The creatures can see where each star has been and where it is going, so that the heavens are filled with rarefied luminous spaghetti. And Tralfamadorians don't see human beings as two-legged creatures either. They see them as great millipedes with babies' legs at one and old people's legs at the other. So basically these aliens are able to see the entire lifetime of a human being, which happens to look like a millipede, since you see a baby in the one end and the old person in the other. We also have the concept of telepathy here. The aliens do not actually converse, they telepathically communicate with each other. These aspects of science fiction are actually brought into the novel not directly, but from an aspect of Kilgore Trout's science fiction novels. So he is a fictional character who writes novels with so many of these aspects of science fiction imbibed in them, and Billy Pilgrim is highly influenced by these and is also seeing them in his real life as well as reading them in these novels of Kilgore Trout. So these are the references that have helped us to analyze this novel. Thank you.